Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. During the previous night, the Russians made massive missile attack all over the entire Ukraine. The explosions took place in Odessa, in Lvov, in Kiev, in Mirgorod, in Kharkov, in Dnipro, in Zaporizhzhia. A lot of attacks, a lot of waves. Now we have already, by the morning of the local time, we have a lot of details, a lot of updates about the type of weapon, type of missiles the Russians were using, the objects that were attacked, and so on. So according to information we have, the Russians were using few waves of strikes. First wave was drones, and the main purpose of drone strikes were to discover the Ukrainian air defense systems, and for these purposes the Russians were trying to attack as far as possible to the western part of Ukraine. So the main purpose and the main job of drones were to fly and stay above the territory of Ukraine as long as possible, and to hit as far as possible areas like Lvov. And furthermore, when talking about Lvov, the sources are saying that sooner or later those drones got the destination, and the destination was the polygons and military bases and so on. So the explosions took place also in Odessa. As you can see on these scenes, the Ukrainians were trying to shut them down, but as usually the Ukrainians were using not just the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians with new type of Shahed of new generation, with a completely different surface that is less visible for Ukrainian air defense, so that's why they were forced to use missiles, and not always some missiles worked successfully. There were a lot of cases when the Ukrainians, according to some sources, using their own missiles, hit their heads, their own buildings. Furthermore, the missiles, after the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian air defense with drones, then the Russians launched the first wave of missiles. The Russians were using the bases on the south of Russian Federation in I'm talking about the cities from the Caspian region, and the airfields Engels and Kaspiysk. And the sources are saying that the Russians were using up to 18 aircraft and more than 150 missiles just during the previous night. Imagine yourself the significant number of these missiles that were launched to the territory of Ukraine. And furthermore, the Russians haven't used their Black Sea fleet, these caliber carriers and so on, submarine fleet, all these things completely fully loaded and waiting for its time. So there are still a lot of possibilities and lots of approaches how the Russians can attack and suppress Ukrainian infrastructure and so on. Furthermore, we got a lot of updates, a lot of videos from Zaporizhzhia. On this sense, we can see the footage of one of those results of those strikes. As you can see, a lot of civilians, residential area. Very difficult to understand what exactly happened there, whether the Russians attacked the base or it's the work, not very good work of air defense systems. Very difficult to understand. When talking about Dnipro, the Russians attacked and destroyed a mall. Very big mall where you can find products and so on, or maybe this is another case of air defense work. So there is a better footage. This is the picture from the mall inside. As you can see, the roof fell down. There is products, as you can see, so everything is ready for New Year. Maybe this area used by the Ukrainians as the ammo depot, some basements and so on, but from on the surface we could see just a regular magazine or shop or mall. When talking about Mirgorod, the Russians, as we know, could attack the air defense airfield in this area that Ukrainians use for Su-24, Su-27 aircrafts. When talking about Kiev, there were a lot of explosions, lots of attacks as well. We have few geolocations, we have few footage and pictures of explosions. For example, on this scene we can see how Ukrainian was filming the result of strike, as a result of missile attack. The roof of the building was damaged. Of course, it's very difficult to understand whether it's a missile or air defense missile of Ukrainian forces. Furthermore, by 11 a.m. of the local time, the sources have summarized the targets, and from the open sources, once again, the Russians during the previous night attacked the Yarovsky polygon in Lvov, the area that Ukrainians use for trainings in the western part of Ukraine, the objects of critical infrastructure in Lvov, the military base, military warehouse in Kiev, the warehouses in Kharkov. Also, the Russians attacked the factory of Ukrainians that Ukrainians use for production of missiles. Also, the Russians were discovering and attacking air defense positions, and the Russians attacked the Academy of Infantry Forces in Lvov. The Ukrainian authorities, air defense authorities, reported that they haven't seen such a number of missiles flying in the territory of Ukraine. The Russians were using everything they could. So the Russians using Kinzhal, ballistic missiles, S-300 missiles, cruise missiles, drones, Ha-22, Ha-32, Ha-101, Ha-505. The only thing that the Ukrainians also added that the Russians haven't used calibers during the previous night. And we are returning back to the Black Sea and to significant number of caliber carriers that currently located in the Black Sea that waiting for their time. Significant number of ships, significant number of submarines, and everything is ready to continue. Obviously, the Russians will continue. Furthermore, the sources are saying about significant number of explosions in Kharkov. Other sources reported that there were around 20 explosions. So by 7 a.m. of the local time, there were around 10 explosions, 10 strikes, but by 11 a.m. of the local time, around 20 strikes, 20 explosions took place in the city. So the Russians started its military missile campaign for the purpose to black completely out Ukraine. Now we're moving to the situation on the ground. Let's start. When talking about Kherson, we haven't received anything. In Zaporizhzhia area, just a few updates about further Russian progress on the south. According to some sources, as a result of Russian offensive operation, they managed to maintain the gray zone and to get closer to the Ukrainian positions on the west of Verbova. So the offensive operation continues, and obviously the Russians will try to force the Ukrainians to step back, as we discussed, to the first defense belt, defense line, the first regrouping line that Ukrainians are going to approach and take for certain control before the next evacuation purposes further to the north. And now we are moving to Avdiivka and South Donetsk direction. When talking about South Donetsk, the Russians published a video of bombardments of Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Ugledar-Vadiane. So this is like a stronghold to the east of Ugledar, very powerful one. The Russians tried to capture this stronghold like months ago from Mykolaiv, but that attack was repelled by the Ukrainians, and now probably the Russians are preparing themselves for the next wave. When talking about Novomikhailivka, the Russians have moved a little bit their focus of FAB-500 bombardments. Now they're bombing like almost the east central part of the village, not the eastern one, because the eastern one is under complete Russian control. And now they're trying to clear the road further to the central and the western part of the village. Probably the next few days we're going to receive more footage and updates from this area. We haven't received anything from Marinka, and we have interesting update from Avdiivka. As we discussed in the previous video, if you remember that before I start making the previous video, there was like reports that the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in the residential area Militseyskia, and today we got the footage. The Ukrainian tank was moving in this village, in this part of Avdiivka, and this tank was hunting the Russian forces and was attacking the Russian positions from the close positions. So this the Ukrainian tank, the main purpose of him was to ruin the buildings, to ruin possible Russian fortifications, and just to destroy the buildings. You see, he was attacking like in 5 meters, he was destroying the building, possible position of Russian forces. So this video confirms the Russian progress, and before the next video we will update the map. And we will update the map something like this. This territory very likely is under complete Russian control. We haven't received anything from Berdychi or Stepovo. The only update we have that was written with the telegram message that the Russians can completely establish control over this territory and continue their movements further to Ocheretyne and further to Novokalinovo. But we will keep this area as a gray zone before we get some real geolocated videos or something. When talking about Bakhmut Klishevka, during the previous night and day, the Russians made few attempts to attack Ukrainians on different sides. The first attack took place from the hill 215.7 in direction of the trees and forests and tree lines lines on the west of Klishchiivka. We don't know the results of that attack. Furthermore, the Russians completely secured and cleared the airfield area on the east of Bakhmut, but the Russians are not planning to continue further in the direction of Ivanovska, because the Russians are saying that the fields between Ivanovska and this let's say residential area, this area is completely mined. There are no even a free space where the Russians can move due to the significant mining. So that's why they need to find another solution, and very likely the Russians will continue their offensive operation, let's say something like this, along the tree lines. So they will try to move this way, as I understand. When talking about Bogdanovka, we have also some updates. The Russians are saying that they managed to advance another 500 meters along this tree line. The Russians managed to advance further in the direction of Grigorovka, and the sources are saying that the Russians have already reached the outskirts of the village. So probably today we're going to receive first footage of clashes inside of this area, and the Ukrainians start publishing the video of reconnaissance operation above Bogdanovka, which from some perspective confirms the Russian progress. On these scenes we can see the Ukrainian drone who was flying about the central part of Bogdanovka, and the author of this video added to this material that the Ukrainians were trying to find and discover the Russian positions. So probably this is the first more or less evidence that the Russians have some progress inside of the village. Now we are moving to Siversk Solidar direction. We have lots of updates. The Russians published the video how they were bombing the Ukrainian positions along this tree line, and this probably was artillery preparation before the attack in direction of Sporne. The Russian military expert Ryber confirms about significant progress of the Russians on this area, and that as a result of offensive operations something like this was captured and cleared by the Russians. Other sources are saying that the Russians managed to answer the farms, and currently they're located here, but once again without any geolocated video confirmations. If there is such a progress, probably the next let's say day or hours we're going to receive something. When talking about Kupiansk direction, we have just one video of another failed Russian attack. To be more precise, we have already discussed this attack yesterday, but today we got more details. As you can see, the northern part of Sinkovka is completely covered with fire, with smoke, very heavy clashes all along Sinkovka from the northern part to the south eastern part. And the Ukrainians, this video was published by the 14th Mechanized Brigade, and in this video we can see more details of failed Russian attack. But the thing that I should note that the Russians managed to land their infantry and capture these tree lines. So we'll see whether that attack was successful or not. But anyway, the armored vehicles were completely destroyed. So that's it about the situation on the ground. This upcoming night we're expecting more strikes from the Russian side, and let's see what is going to be next. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.